Let's wrap up the week. Everybody's kind of super tired, I feel. Like lots of stuff going on, lots of shipping, lots of content prepping, lots of releasing. So, but it was fun. I think it was the first week that we had, like first launch week that we tried basically. And lots of lessons learned as well, I think. But went quite well, I would say. So the whole goal today, actually let's first introduce a couple of our folks that we have on the live stream here. Victor, you want to start first for those that don't know you?
Sure. My name is Victor. I one of the co-founders of Annex, and was at Google on the Angular team at some point, and I like building tools for monorepos.
Zach.
Cool. I'm Zach. I have none of the accolades that Victor described, but I do work for NX. I'm an architect here, and I like monorepos too. I like all repos, really. Let's not exclude here, Victor.
Yeah, I agree. But for me, any repo is a monorepo, right? And therefore, I like monorepos.
That's just cheating.
At least any repo can be a monorepo. Can become a monorepo.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Cool. And my name is Yuri. Doing a lot of like content recently at NX. Been using monorepos for like forever, even before I joined NX. So cool. This week, today we're going basically to kind of look a bit what happened this week. It is also the chance for some of you that are attending and watching to ask questions, to dive deeper on some of the topics that we launched. So the main things that we launched this week, you can also follow along directly. Zach, can you pull in my screen share? Do you have to? Cool.
There you go.
So this is basically our launch week website. So if you go to nx.dev launch-nx, you will see here all the things that happened this week. There's also a recording for yesterday's conference that we had in the evening, and all the announcements basically that went out during this week with like all the links to the blog posts, to the videos that we had, to today's live stream here. And as mentioned here, you can follow along with the actual full recording of the conference that happened yesterday. Now we're all going to release all these talks individually as well, linking them to the slides and example repos. So stay tuned for some more content that's coming out over the next couple of weeks on our channels. So make sure you subscribe there. Cool. Should we start with the first one, which was on Monday, which I think is the foundation basically for a lot of the things that happened this week and that are going to happen in the next couple of weeks and months, which was Project Crystal.
Can I start just by giving Yuri some props on the image? I really like the image. This is like the perfect crystal.
This one?
Yes.
Yeah, this was Chelsea. Chelsea created this crystal for us. I actually like it, especially like the blue tone which it has, like the blue background kind of color, which kind of matches the rest of our stuff. So yeah, it's gonna follow with us, I guess, for a couple of months now.
I like it a lot. I also like the idea of crystal providing clarity. I think that was like part of the idea.
Naming is hard. You don't want to. How long did we?
Well, I remember actually in one of the NXT meetings, we're like, "What do we name it?" And we're just like, and Yuri was sick at the time. We're just like, "Wait for Yuri. Yuri will figure it out."
Yeah. And I was sick, and I followed along with the discussion. It was like, hopefully, once I'm back, they have a name. So, like, we just go with it and roll with it, because I guess like we were searching for a name probably as long as we were coding actually the implementation of Project Crystal. Because we call it like PCV3 initially or something.
PCV3 was for a project. Because we like abbreviation, like PCV3 third generation. So that's why actually we for a while people called NX3. Right? We have NX is right now NX18, right? But because it seems such a big shift, it's like the third iteration of what NX is, right? So most of the majors we release on that, the cool stuff, etc. There are advancements. But very rarely, it's honestly that like things like that are open. It only happened once, I think, right? The change that's big. So, but the name is hard. Then we had a Slack channel where we discussed all sorts of Greek words we can use, etc. It was crazy.
Naming is hard, but it was as big of a change that it kind of deserves some other name. That's something like the PCV3, which is kind of weird to speak and mention as well. So, but yeah. Well, Jason came up, I think, with Crystal. Like that was one of I think Jason's proposal. We kind of like, we like it. Awesome. We already have an image in mind. Let's roll.
Exactly.
Gone, done, check.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I love too that we did break from our patterns. So we had a pretty strict, like every 6 months we're going to do a major kind of pattern. So that way people could anticipate when breaking changes would come in. That's kind of the motivation for it. But bringing in Crystal here was, I think it was cool that we broke our traditions specifically for this, just to mark.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I actually was surprised more people didn't point it out that we released out of schedule, right? That we had an extra major sneaked out that people usually wouldn't, right? I mean, as people know that I don't believe in Semver. I think the whole major minor is nonsense. We can talk about it. It's a separate point.
Don't bring that up. We just released NX release today.
I know. We're get all these conventional comments
but you can use it without it. But I know people love it, so etc. I personally, like, always the latest kind of thing, right? So anywho, so but yeah, it is a major that came out of just in the middle of a cycle, basically, right? So we have a major planned for April, right? We had another major in February, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah. Do you want to go a bit into the depth of like the thought process that was behind, Victor? Like how we kind of started on it, like why we started it, like what it means.
Yes. So in general, I believe in the following, which is the tool is useful. You basically take the usefulness of a tool and you take the cost of adoption and divide by usefulness, right? That's kind of what you assess. So some tools are immensely useful, but the cost of adoption are infinitely high, right? Or very high. Like, for example, Bazel, I think it's very useful, but for most companies, not everyone, but most companies, hard to adopt. Adoption divided by usefulness, therefore the number is still very high. People don't do it. It's like a threshold thing you need to cross, right? And I think for NX, the cost of adoption was never as high, right? It's pretty reasonable. The usefulness was very good. Like, I think in terms of power and usefulness, NX was always super high, much higher than any of the competing tools, right? But you can argue that if you have an existing repo, for new repos as well, NX works reasonably well. You start, it works, cool. But if you have an existing large repo, bringing an NX could have been tricky, right? So that's why 2 years ago, we almost 2 years around that time, we came up with a whole package-based repo setup and say, you know what, let's do what Learner does, what Turbo does, and others. It just because it's a subset of what we can do. We can easily do that. Boom, we publish a benchmark showing we're like an order of magnitude faster than other tools, etc. And saying, you see, even in this reduced case, still faster, still better. It's all cool, right? The cost of adoption in this case is low, 0, all right, or very low. But the usefulness is also lower. There is a reason why we don't do this simple case, and we actually advocate for a more interesting case. Because once you, what we call the integrated repo, once you let your tool, like your, NX, understand what you're using for building, testing, end-to-end testing, etc., it can do a lot more cool stuff for you. Suddenly, you don't need to maintain all of this shebang, right? It kind of works. You can have 200 people in the same repo, very successfully contributing, and the whole thing works. It's standardized, and like a big bank is happy. Right, kind of thing, right?
Yep.
The problem with that, so like that's there's a lot of value in there, but the cost of adoption for an existing project, if you have an existing repo, was rather high, right? Because we basically said we had to wrap all your tools, and then connect things, and then through that wrapping we understand everything, and do all this magical stuff, right? And
I think it was a bit that all or nothing kind of situation. Which
that's right. Yeah, exactly.
Hindering, because like people were looking at it, maybe even thinking this could be useful, but then you look at your reality and like, it's gonna take months to actually migrate or something.
That's right. So we had basically you either do the learner thing or like learner style, right, or Turbo style, the same kind of simplistic way of managing stuff, or you go into like where real value is. But the real value for existing repo requires quite some onboarding, and that was like this bifurcation, right? Where people are like, okay, which one? Where should I go, right? And we heard about it for many years, right? People who I won't mention because they keep misrepresenting our views on Twitter, right? Or those be like, NX is this and that, etc., right? And it's because of that point, right? So they had an element of truth in it that yes, in a particular case, if you actually want to get the real power, you have to commit a bit more. If you don't need the power, the NX onboarding is just as simple as other tools onboarding, simpler if anything, right? But if you want the power, okay, that there is a bit like you're in a particular realm then, right? And so that's what was the case, and we tried to figure out how to solve it. We gathered together many times. Like this last fall, we all in Toronto, So a bunch of NX team leads, I think all NX team leads are in Toronto. It's like Toronto is like, half of the NX team is in Toronto. So we were there in the park and we're like thinking super hard, right? Or like how to solve it, what is the problem, doing, retrospective.
I remember every one of you freezing in a park. I'm sitting from home via Zoom joining.
Yeah, because it was supposed to be warm. It was supposed to be warm.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be plus 20, but it ended up being like super. Anyway, so we're sitting in the park and there, and like, how should we just, for several days, we just gather and just write a bunch of notes, trying to figure out what to do it, and how to do it. And then just through, like, that's kind of primed our brains, that's how creativity in general works. You're like, okay, the problem is, understood. We have a description of the problem with some suggestions that ended up not being used because most of the suggestions you have are nonsense, right? You just try to and then your whatever you got, your subconscious mind is like, thinking, and then we arrived at the moment we arrived at this with I remember it was like Yuri, Jason. I think it's the same group of people on the call, right? Suddenly we went from, I think we could do this in like an hour. We're like, okay, we have a full design, right? Like we went from, okay, so we kind of do this, and then suddenly we're like, well, if we can be like VS Code with plugins, where NX works for any project right away, kind of learner style, right? It just works, right? It provides a lot of value right away. Like VS Code, you can open any project in VS Code. It never fails to, almost never fails to open, right? It opens, it at the minimum, it lets you edit your text, search the grep for stuff, right? And manage Git. Like it does stuff already for any project, right? It's not like you open a project in VS Code, it's like, can I do it? You need to configure things. No, it will open in some way, right? It may not support Rust. It will be just text, but at least you can edit it, right? And run Rust commands in the terminal. It does something useful, right? But then if you install the Rust plugin for VS Code, then suddenly it can, it gets Rust, it can, integrates with the language service, suddenly it can add a complete refactor and do cool things. Same as like Cypress or Playwright. You can go and install the Playwright plugin for VS Code. But before that, Playwright is still there. You can still edit text. VS Code doesn't know about Playwright. It doesn't do anything useful Playwright specifically. But the moment you install the plugin, you can run individual tests, debug them, and do cool stuff, right? We're like, what if we like went with this model? And then, yes, that's what we went with. We're saying, well, let's our plugins be the same. You just install a Playwright plugin into an NX repo, and Playwright plugin, you can configure the same a few things like if you want to. Right? But generally speaking, there is no configuration. Just say, enable the plugin, right? And it will find all Playwright configuration files. It will ask Playwright how Playwright is configured. It will require things correctly and get information from the Playwright itself, all the output folders, all the stuff, right? We'll get all of it. So it has correct information, right? That it can evaluate it. It can record in the graph. And now using this correct information, it defines all the targets for you. It knows exactly how to run your end-to-end test with Playwright. It knows where you're going to cache your artifacts, where all of this stuff is. It knows because it asked Playwright, right? So now you don't have to configure anything because Playwright knows where it is. You have to configure Playwright, right? Or Playwright has some defaults. But anyway, that stuff is already there in the Playwright itself. Instead of you telling NX about Playwright, right? That's what was the model before. NX now asks Playwright on its own, right? And by doing so, it can, derive all this information more correctly. So there is no chance it's out of sync because it's actually asking the tool. It's like, what are you going to do? And the tool's like, I'm going to do this, right? And that's where the first part, right? Where suddenly, instead of you're defining all the targets, and just ask for it and it just works, right? That's point number one. Point number two, where we went further, we say, well, since we're doing it, why are we running our wrapper around Playwright? So just running the command as Playwright, right? It is Playwright itself, right? And that was a so streamlined where right now, everything you run via NX is not some magical function that's inside NX. It's actually, you can see the command. Just Playwright test this, right? It will actually tell you what it is running. It's very simple. So it's just going to run that command. But the only difference is right now NX is aware about the caching, so it would know what that command will use, so it can do a cache hit instead of running the command, and it will know where that command is going to put files to. So after the command runs, NX is going to grab the files, tar them, and reuse for future computation. It becomes a lot more lightweight, a lot more clarity or crystal. You can see through it. It's that idea that you can see through the NX and see that the command happens. There is no layers in between. It's not obscured, right? It's very directly in there. So that's kind of the part. So, but to do that, we had to, obviously you could do that. But the one thing we had to do is to say that if you're starting with a new NX workspace, right? Previously, our executors at the top would wire things up for you, right? But do some kind of wiring to make sure that certain things hold, right? Well, now, there are no executors. You're running the command. So therefore, we had to write plugins or more sophisticated plugins for Webpack and stuff to say that if you actually want to have a monorepo experience with those things. Then you can enable, like, import those and have a more rich integrated experience. But if you don't want to use our plugins because you have your own plugins, you have your own repo where you already build the same functionality, right? Arguably, like, for most of the time, not as well, right? Because, you know, it's just something that you usually do as a side project at the company, right? But if you have your own thing that works, keep it. We actually don't care how you things are wired up deep inside when we wrap it, right? With our command. Like, so you can keep your whole repo as you have it right now with your own custom super duper functions, and it doesn't matter, right? Annex will ask Playwright what you want to, or Cypress, whatever, right? What's going on. That thing will ask your plugin in this case. Like, if you're setting some, you know, custom folders for videos and screenshots and all that jazz, right? Your function will set it, but next to ask Playwright will invoke your function and tell it that's a folder. We're like, okay, sounds good, right? So it ends up being a lot more like, it doesn't require such strict setup as we had before. Any project, basically, you can throw an X in because it's going to ask the tool underneath, which presumably runs because we have an existing project and Playwright runs on it. We can just ask Playwright, so where are the files going to be created? Understood. We're going to cache those, right? No configuration required, right? And I think that's kind of
especially like
part.
reading from directly from the tool's config. I think that is, like, for me personally, that is like a super big win, because like for just like as I showed in the video, like on Monday, I think, and I was also in a talk, I think, like when you edit the vite config, the output path, because you change it, well, it works, right? Because like we pick that up because we now read from that rather than going back to some like executor or like global config saying the output is now in that folder rather than in the other one.
That's right.
So
that's exactly right. So
it's a big win.
That's a cool part, that we basically reduced. Even before, you could define your targets in a dry way, etc. But now, like, there is nothing. You don't need to do anything, and the chance of you being out of sync is, I mean, maybe not zero, because you can screw up anything, but like, it's very low. Okay, things are kind of working on their own magically, and you know, you don't need to do it. You need to worry about it. It just works, right? With zero configuration. If anything, the configuration is decreased because all your custom npm scripts, when you invoke Playwright, you don't need them anymore. All right, because
you could remove them basically.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's where kind of the VS Code metaphor, or I mean, I actually use IntelliJ on VS Code, but you know, the editor metaphor kicks in, right? And that's what the editor does. When you open a modern editor, a project in a modern editor, VS Code, IntelliJ, whatever, you don't need to configure it. It just works. It just sees what it is. It understands it. It's able to interact with the tools you have just right away, right? You open the jest file or vtest file, run it, thing runs, right? Or like a spec file, you can run via jest or vtest, it just runs, right? You don't have to tell VS Code how. You don't need to tell IntelliJ how. It figures it out on its own, and 99% of the time it's correct, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the magic, right?
Yeah, but even like that opens up like a lot of other possibilities as well. Like, we have already ideas like down the road, like what you could potentially do with this. But one point that we immediately also said from the beginning is like the whole migration story, right? Because like, as we said initially, like there's one thing about I want to use an X more in my existing solution, but there's also people that said like, hey, I have this solution of like a npm workspace repo or something, and I actually would want to migrate to a more plugin oriented thing, but it's just difficult, right? Or takes time, and like we all know, like time for tooling and stuff is usually short because like you want to ship features clearly, which is legit and fair.
That's right.
And so like even by just now having that single source of truth, like the vite config, whatever, and we jump on top of that, like I showed it on Monday, and I just was just like, even not a refined process. I just took it and tried it out and dropped it into an existing NX repo in the video that I created, right? That is like a pure React Vite CLI created project, dropped it in, but because there was the NX Vite CLI, like the NX Vite plugin already installed, it picked up the vite config and generated the targets, and you're done. You go. Clearly, that was like super simple project, like a new one. You might have, but like that one was hard initially before.
Like, but dude, we're trying on their own projects now, big convoluted project, and it's the same. Go inside there, like, and it just kind of works. You're like, okay, there is not, as long as I have a my tool like Cypress file in there, for example, right? It just knows how to do everything, right? Just works, right? And anyway, so, but people don't, like, people who like for years, that was our like the thing that was like, but upgrading existing project is hard, or you have extra configuration files. Now they're like, it's no problem. You can use a plugin based approach with all the wrapping that does everything with one Annex configuration file at the root, Annex.json, right? But the power is still there, so you get all the power you had before, but now the configuration is as simple as in Learner, kind of thing, but with all the super power, with tailored
and you just
extend Yeah.
You just extend what you need to extend. You get the defaults right away,
That's right.
right? Like I think
That's
that is
right.
also highly valuable because you still have those project JSONs or package JSON and whatnot, but you can go in and just set that single flag. Like on one project, I just want to set the port differently,
That's
but I
right.
just
Yeah.
adjust that port property, but all the rest is inherited from the defaults that you just get going.
That's right. So in this case, it becomes at a maximum. It's as much as having a PM script. That is maximum amount of configuration required. But usually it's less. So that's kind of the thing that you basically start with an X less repo, and you will never have more configuration that you had at that point. Chances are you're going to just reduce the configuration by removing your NPM script. So that's it. Right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the plan. So I think that worked out fine. Another thing that we were bugged by in a positive way. It's like it's always on top of our mind. It's like, Ethan, how do we make non-JavaScript projects work well? All right. If I'm a Java developer using Gradle, right? Gradle is very cool. I like Gradle, etc. Right? But like, okay, if I add an X, do I need to add project JSON next to my Gradle file? It's ugly. Java people hate it. Yada yada. Right? So. So to a couple of iterations ago, we added a way to run an X, for example, without node modules. You can actually use an X and have zero node modules. We're like, okay, that's cool. But it's still like that part was cool, but there was still a bit of clunkiness around it. It's like, but what about this project JSON file? It's just weird, etc. Right? It just felt a bit weird. Okay, but now it's no more because with the same thing, a new Gradle experience will be released in March, right? Where doesn't matter. You have Gradle files, same way. We analyze the create of the target, set up the cache, and enable distribution. Done. Right. So as a Java developer, you have zero extra to what you currently have. Right. What you have is what you have. Right. We're just able to distribute it and cache it, for example. Right. And it applies to everything else. So I think the model works well in basically in every case. It's actually quite interesting that we didn't do it a long time ago because it's now in retrospect, okay, that's a good design, right? I don't understand why we didn't.
But it's always when you see it, right? Like once you see it, it's like it was kind of like obvious to some degree. Why didn't we do it before, right? So
yeah, I think there was some of the stuff that we had put in, Victor, that you were referring to. I don't know if it was a year ago or 2 years ago now, but when we put a lot of the stuff in for package based, I feel like it kind of enabled most of this. Maybe the other piece missing was like the inferred targets. But
we did have it for 2 years as well. That's the thing. We had all of this. I think that's one of the things where you have to have core capability. That's what I genuinely believe. If you have core capabilities, then somehow via them at some point you'll like if you are, for example, a writer, right? Like write books. If you become a good writer and you learn how to develop this muscle of writing, that eventually you can write a good book because you have this core capability that you can use to, it's the same stuff we had in inferred targets. We kind of figured out all these pieces separately. Another piece we should mention that like editor integration, right? Because with inferred targets, you can run a command to look at the target separately, but honestly, it's much nicer where they're shown in your VS Code or IntelliJ right there. You go in that there, you see what's there, you click on it, it will tell you exactly what's been derived from the tools underneath, how it's all configured. Honestly, I wish VS Code or IntelliJ did the same for when they integrate with Jest. Like, I actually want to see more, like, what exactly happens when I click on that thing, rather than you running something, right? And it's, so like, we show you everything right in there. And that's another piece. If we didn't have VS Code, the trade-off would have been more rougher because you're saying, well, nothing is written there. Now I have to run some command in the terminal to examine it in the browser, blah, blah, blah. But in here, because it's right there, it's effortless. You go inside there, like, what is it? Oh, I can do 5 things. And you can do it right inside the editor. It's just kind of inline. Like, it makes the information that you didn't have to configure. You don't have to configure it, but you can still see it. Right? And I think that's kind of the key part where it doesn't hide anything from you. By doing so, it would obscure. That's kind of the main argument against explicit configuration or like written down configuration, is that if you don't have it, you have to run some command to see it. So most of the time you're not aware of it and things get out like clunky, etc., out of sync. You kind of, but here you don't write it, but we still show it to you, right? Via VS Code plugin, IntelliJ plugin, right? So you kind of don't lose anything in terms of clarity. You just don't have to write anything, right? As so, and that's to me is like the other piece. Like, you had to have all of those pieces in place for the experience to be good. If we didn't have good VS Code experience, a good IntelliJ experience, and VS Code we had for a while, but IntelliJ is only last year where it reached a place with kind of rocks, right? Yep. So, but if we didn't have these two experiences, we wouldn't be able to really say, you know what, that's just so much better in all regards. It would have been a much bigger trade-off, right? But because it works well, it's not much of a trade-off. You're saying it's all there, you can still see it. It's just this time it's derived for you instead of you're having to do it, right?
Yep.
I did want to highlight some of the conversations here in the chat because chat's popping off a little bit. Bill's here. Bill, I know you from ngconf workshops. So I'm assuming you're an Angular person. You're asking an Angular question. I realize I'm making that assumption, but there is a question here about like with this shift, things get a little bit more complicated for Angular. Interesting place Jack took this. Jack is one of the team leads here for NX. So maybe we just go back to Angular.json.
Oh, yeah.
We've
Okay,
been
so-
discussing this for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's that's kind of the thing. So let me it's actually an important thing to where the trade-off is. There is actually a legitimate trade-off. I won't talk too much about it because we haven't made the final decision. For Angular, there is, I think, like if you look at, for example, the Webpack experience we have for React, or like Vite experience for React, something like that, right? We always assume that most of your configurations will be in Vite or Webpack configuration file. That's where you configure Vite or Webpack, right? And we just kind of wrap it a little bit and do it. So in this case, saying, you know what, just trust your Vite configuration, and that's your source of truth, and we just ask it, right? Seems like there is no trade-off. Every Vite React developer should be just happy with the new design compared to the old design. It's just better in all regards, right? I think. For Angular, it's a bit trickier because Angular JSON, like we could do the same for Angular JSON. So like, let's treat Angular JSON as we treat Vite, right? For example, and ask it and get. We could make it that is possible, right? But then you have like a for Project JSON currently, it kind of does what Angular does. Like the difference between Angular and Project JSON is not as huge. Like Angular developers can actually go to Project JSON and just deal with one fewer thing, right? Instead of and that's where I think for Angular it will be a bit of a trade-off, I guess, like with maybe some reduction where now you have Angular JSON configuration file, and then all the inputs and outputs are sprinkled separately, right? But to be clear, so I think even if we and to be clear, we didn't remove any of the old experience; it's still there, right? But given the old experience, I'm leaning towards more that we should support Angular JSON the same as Vite if you want to, at least. If you have an existing Angular project with Angular JSON or like a monorepo with Angular, we should be able to derive it in the same way derive Vite because there is no reason to. It's trivial for us to do. It's very easy, and you know, like why not? Like why not do it? So I'm leaning toward that. At a minimum, it should be an option because really you can see Angular JSON basically as being this is the project configuration, or you can see Angular JSON as like a Webpack configuration, right? It's like a and if you treat it as a Webpack, then it should be supported 100%. It's easy for us to support. To be clear, it's actually trivial, right? So it's trivial for us to support, and because it kind of, I'm leaning toward that maybe we should just do it and say, you know, like let's just support Angular JSON because you know, why not?
There have been quite some discussions, right? Because like even I think you're also thinking about multiple Angular JSONs potentially, right?
That's right.
Because that was also in the play. Because like that one single Angular JSON we had for a while, that created problems in huge monoreps because you have huge merge conflict, just doesn't work. And so we went to the project JSONs, and people have actually really appreciated that.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we wanted to stay as close as possible to what the Angular CLI does right now. And so like if we remove everything, or at least the default experience would be like you don't see anything in the project at all. And like people might be confused because they're more accustomed to that. So yeah. But I think it is tricky because as you said, like there's some folks that are more experienced with NX, and they have already been trying to go in the direction of reducing those sometimes even redundant configs, right, throughout all their project libraries and stuff.
That's right.
And their project crystals would apply perfectly because you could just do it, like remove it and have it like at the more NX top level root and then just apply it downwards.
But it is a bit tricky because like thing that we do, for example, for Project JSON is target defaults. If you have a lot of Angular stuff with Project JSON, you can apply target default. It works, right?
Yep.
Well, if you have Angular JSON, then like what should happen there exactly, right? Because if we treat Angular JSON as Webpack, then all the options there are not overridable via default because it's like, you know, that's a closed box, right? And so I can see the trade-offs. Like that's why I think for Angular, it's the only case where there is more of a trade-off, and it's because the Angular experience, we basically said when you use Angular with NX, forget about Angular CLI. It's no more, you know. And because there is a shift, okay, then yes, you know, you kind of have a nicer experience. When you use React with Vite, we're not saying forget about Vite. No, Vite is still there. React is still there. So for everyone else, there is no trade-off. I think the Project Crystal is clearly a massive win. For Angular, if you just go into that style, there might be kind of small trade-off somewhere in there where it's like maybe perhaps less clear whether it's necessarily super beneficial, right? But I think there are ways to do it where we can make it, like if we just go with supporting Angular CLI as is. But we can make the Angular experience, again, derivable without supporting Angular CLI. Like, you know, we'll experiment. But that's why we didn't do it in this past, because I think
Exactly.
The current Angular experience with Next is actually very good, and we don't want to break it. So we want to make sure whatever we introduce, whatever we recommend people to use, is at the minimum as good or better. So and there is not much of a trade-off, right? So you have the same experience you would have right now as a Vue developer or Next.js developer or Remix developer, where the new experience is just objectively better in every regard.
Yep. I did want to highlight this comment from Jonathan just to maybe highlight the irony of how we started with Angular JSON, went to Workspace, and now to Project, and now potentially back to Angular for our Angular folks. That's
but we haven't decided. So I think that I think genuinely speaking, it's a bit tricky. I think anyway, we talked about it enough. Yeah, it's a bunch of trade-offs that are interesting, and I'm not even convinced that the Angular experience should be
Yeah.
Let's go. Like Angular analog
we all agree
adopting
with
NX and X and adopting Angular analog. Like that's kind of great.
Yeah.
An inception case there.
Yep.
That's
we stop support for Angular, just analog from here on out. But yeah, to Bill's point, I think Bill appreciates our decision to not break NX plus Angular. It is in a good spot, I think. So
no. Like to be clear, the previous experience also works for like React developers or Vue developers or whatever. Nothing has been broken, right? That's why I don't believe.
Yeah, I think that's also good to mention.
X18 is an X18, but
executors.
Yeah, it didn't break anything, right? So, and we are not intending to break anything in anytime soon, right? So,
yeah,
I think the new experience is much better, but you can have a massive repo using the old experience, and we'll write migration to hopefully move you towards the new experience. But you can still stick with an old experience for the foreseeable future.
Yeah,
I think we've actually
had
it, right?
Oh, go ahead, Yuri. Sorry.
You can even mix it right now. Because even
You
now,
can.
for instance, like if you create a new Angular repo, which use the project and the executors as usual, but then you install like some of the newer plugins or Playwright plugins that might use the Crystal setup. So they are completely like mixable in the same workspace. That's
exactly.
Not a problem.
We committed to nothing, Bill. Nothing.
As Victor promised. I saw something as Victor promised.
No. Let's not put words in Victor's mouth. But like to your point, one of the questions we've been getting over and over on the Discord is like, what does Project Crystal break in terms of like the old way of doing things? I actually don't think it breaks anything. It's pretty much we just took our plugins. The core functionality stays the same. Our plugins are now updated just to be like more simple, more easy to adopt other tools.
Right.
So
the word break, that's why I think I can rant about Semver all the time, but generally speaking, like breaking is like if you're thinking about your dev experience from before to this new experience, okay, some things, the way you extend things, for example, you could have had like your own executor, which is not fitting in the Project Crystal model of things. It didn't break it though, it still works, right? By the way, as a side note, just to show how much we're committed to the good dev experience, right? Is that we had to, because Project Crystal, like remember one of the things I mentioned, it was get rid of executors for Project Crystal and just invoke your tools direct, right? So to do that, there is actually some improvements there is coming to make it. One of the things we had to do is to change how we invoke those things, because every other tool, right, does it by piping output from the tool underneath. Right, using that changes the output from if you would run it by hand. So basically, if you run Vite by hand, you have a rich terminal output with like spinners and animations and all this stuff, right? And if you invoke it with that, the output is usually like black and white or whatever, much worse, or even so some tools say like, oh, they support colors now or whatever. Supporting colors is like, this is not it's like when they say you want to go to the moon and someone invented a bike. It's like
colors are nice though, Victor. It's something. Like let's not take it away from them.
It's good, but there is a difference between like, okay, let's like we need to look at milestones, right? This is like a milestone, like so like for Next to be a true rapper, right? Rapping, not a musician, but a true rapper, right? That can invoke Vite and preserve the output in a way that's very transparent, the crystal clarity, all this jazz, right? The terminal output has to work exactly as it would with Vite, right? So we have to, involve our, because a big part of Next right now is written in Rust, right? Brought some custom labels to basically there's quite a few efforts went into making that experience rich, right? So we actually capture output as is, std out, std in. There is no difference. So like that alone, just to show our commitment to that. When you invoke NX via like a Vite via NX, for example, it's exactly the same as invoking it by hand, except NX would do a cache thing and and manage the caching for you, and etc. Or like make sure the task graph dependencies are run first or whatever, right? But in terms of the output from it, will be the same. That by itself was huge, right? And we're making some improvements in that area in the next couple of weeks, where because we know what we're invoking, we can actually show you and make it even the output you see. Because currently we show you some the connects run yada yada colon target name, right? And then we show the output comes in. Really, what you want to see is that what tool underneath runs. You want to see playwright test this, right? Because that's what actually happens. The next part it should be the whole crystal clarity thing. So there's some tweak in terminal output you will see in the next minor release, which should make the whole experience more complete. Way of like running things via NX is basically the same as running by hand, right? You see this exact same thing, right? And so in terms of breaking, the crystal breaking and stuff, that's the thing that would have been broken if we didn't attend to it, right? Because then you're saying, well, because we had a different way of capturing output before using some Node.js magic or whatever, right? So like that, your output would have been worse, and that's what we saw. It was like that output is not good, so that we had to instruct John, who is also from Trona, roughly, right, to make it work, right? Is like that would have been broken because the output would have been worse, all right? Would have been worse. I mean, not worse than other tools, to be clear. Like no other tool in the JS space, even
but it's kind of weird. Like if you run it like Vite alone, for instance, you see colors and nice formatting, everything is like just black and white, and like. I mean, someone could argue it's not the difference, but if you see it continuously, right?
Immense difference. Especially colors is easy, but animations, when you run a Gradle test, and it takes 5 minutes to test your things, it shows what you're testing. If you don't have a return output, it's just going to be stuck there and then show you the output, right?
Yeah,
that's not good at all. No. So it has to be so the things like that would have been broken. In my mind, it's a breaking change, right? Your quality of life as a developer, like no test would fail probably, right? But you as a developer, like, okay, that's worse, right? We had to make sure that's not worse, right? So we put a lot of effort into making it non-breaking, right? Yes, as John pointed out, it's the same stuff as VS Code is using. So like we take this type of stuff very seriously, right? Because we actually aim to be as transparent as possible. Invoking something via NX should be the same, both as the in and the out, as invoking by hand, except NX does more cache and distribution, orchestration stuff, right? I mean, nothing is broken, basically. That's the answer.
Cool. Let's move over to the next items. I mean, Project Grizzle deserved a big chunk of this live stream because it's so fundamental. But next up, like we had like at the conf on Thursday, just to hook into the point of like Gradle support coming. Gregory also showed his .NET support. Like he has like an open source NX plugin for .NET, which is actually quite popular. I think, like you said, like something like 15K downloads a week, right? Zach, last time we looked, so it's pretty popular, and I liked his talk. So definitely check that one out because especially the point where he applied Project Grizzle, you could see, hey, you just changed those couple files, but you don't have to change anything else of how you're using that .NET solution. That's in that case, right? And similarly on Tuesday, we had also the release of our new NX Nuxt support. So we've been starting to have Vue support. What is it, like 2 months ago, roughly? Or 3 months maybe, and now we also dived into Nuxt, which I highly appreciate. I didn't have the chance to play around with it quite a lot, but I like how they manage their community. Daniel specifically pushes it forward and maintains it. There's a lot of work in maintaining an open source community, and you had it on the show, Zach, right, on Tuesday. So how did that go?
Yeah, that went great. We actually, it was interesting. It turns out to be more of a party kit stream than a Nuxt stream, just because of what Daniel wanted to work on. But yeah, it was cool. Pretty much the way NX came in, it's like we used NX to generate a new Nuxt app, and then that was it.
Just
like, it was just a Nuxt app, And nice. Everything worked from an NX side, but like we started working on a multiplayer tic-tac-toe application, so you could play with WebSockets while using PartyKit. I don't fully understand all the tech going on behind there, but it's the effect of WebSockets, so you could play against another player just on the web. I really like that kind of paradigm. It was fun for me and Daniel to mess with. So yeah, I mean I think in many ways NX did its job. Like gave us, by having the plugin, we had an easy way of dropping in a new Nux app. We didn't really get into CI, so we didn't like see a lot of that piece, but that's the other obvious place where NX can really unlock a lot of value for you pretty much just by installing the plugin. So yeah,
I mean, that's also the point, right? To get something set up quickly helps you, like maybe splitting out into libraries or whatnot, but then like kind of getting out of the way so you can focus on what you're doing.
Yeah, there was some interesting things that came up during the live stream. Just like there's some interesting things Nux does with like a generated TS config that kind of doesn't work with the way our generators or our plugin was running, but it gave us something to look at. So Katerina took that back. I think we'll have a fix out for that here soon.
All right, because Katerina was on the show as well.
Yeah. So it was fun
getting that first-hand feedback.
Yeah,
cool. Then I need to update my NX Plus View blog. Yeah, don't mention that. I just finished my update to Astro. So
I know. With all this content,
upgrading, start writing.
Go back and keep maintaining. Convert all these things to Project Crystal. I guess we don't need to convert it to Project Crystal. They still work, but it'd still be nice to go to the new way of doing things for a lot.
No, we have to. It's like you just have to update.
It's in your contract, Zach.
Well, we'll see you in 6 months, Victor. Every content we've done.
So far, it's been easy. I've went to repos, just removed Project.json, things work. So it's actually surprising how relatively straightforward it's been.
Yeah, you can go to it. Cool. The next big one before the secret announcement that Zach dropped yesterday, but it's kind of related, so we can kind of talk about it in the same time. So we had on Wednesday NX Agents, which is like introducing a whole way of like how we reimagine how CI works for monorepos in particular. Like we have been fighting with that a lot when working with our enterprise, our clients and stuff, where we kind of hand code and help them set up their CI pipelines. And I mentioned it a bit, I think like yesterday in the conference moderation when we talked about it. You can almost treat CI as a production system. It's not affecting your end users, but like if you have like a team of 200 developers in a monorepo and your CI doesn't work, they will start screaming at you, right? And I had felt that in the past when we kind of handcrafted CI pipelines and kind of try to parallelize as much as possible to make it go down like to 120 minutes or something. So yeah, let's dive into the NX Agents part, and then we can kind of chime in how Tasky can potentially help there as well. In the future.
Yeah, so I think that the basically a part of what we always did at the company is taking some ideas from I think in general a lot of ideas that big tech companies don't apply to small companies. Not everything applies, right? Because the market's different, right? Like the like people who use it differently, but some ideas do apply, or at least you can be inspired by them. You can go and say like, I wonder what the Google's, Metas and whatever do these days, and like because usually they're ahead of the curve. They go into some weird custom built solutions, but in terms of ideas, there's a lot of super smart people working in there trying to so it's worth learning from them, right? And see what could you apply in your day to day, right? In the same way, it's worth learning from like academic papers. You can go and read them, and most of it won't apply, but there will be something like, okay, that's a cool idea, and then it applies, right? And then suddenly you advance something, right? So one of the ideas we always were interested in is like monorepos, right? And the issue with monorepos, the issue is like the trade-off of monorepos. Monorepos tend to be bigger, right? For that's like because that's hope. Yeah, because that they don't have to be, but generally speaking, you put a bunch of things together, therefore the thing gets bigger. So now you have thing like there are lots of upsides to this. We can interact with each other, import code, share code, bound like a lot more collaboration, dev mobility increases. But and the code structure is much more defined. But like, well, if things tend to get bigger, then like does my CI run fast? I would say it doesn't. You don't have to be in like this monorepo as in the big M monorepo scenario. There are a lot of relatively small projects which like where CI takes like an hour, right? Because end-to-end takes a long time or something. So it's not. You don't have to be that big to be in a case like, okay, things are kind of slow. What do we do about it, right? Historically, and we need to historically early on, our main angle of attack there was, well, if you have a lot of stuff, do less of it, right? Eliminate before optimize. It's like the whole 4-hour work week kind of thing, right? Start by elimination, right? What is not necessary, right? And I think it's like 4-hour CI, next book idea or something. 4-hour CI sounds bad, but you know what I mean. Quick CI, 4 minutes CI, right? But the idea that you need to eliminate the type of computation you don't need first. All right, if you have a big repo, figure out what is actually not required and don't run it every time. So we did affected command that would do that, and then we added caching, which is the same, which affected would say, I know for a fact that your PR doesn't affect those projects, therefore, all right, I don't have to run them. Caching is like, I know for a fact we have a hash, you've run this thing before, so let's do that, etc. Though I still think that's an important thing to do right away, all right, because less computation run, just better. Less compute is always a good thing. That, of course, doesn't work with everything, because sometimes you have big repos where you change a lot of stuff, right? And it's just like there is nothing to eliminate. It's just a lot of stuff to compute, right? And at that point, you have to distribute because one machine isn't fast enough, etc. Right? Especially machines people use on CI, which are like, like a 486 from like
20% power of your work machine.
Yeah, exactly. 20%. No, it's like 5% power. It's like
5% probably.
Like, it's so like. Generally speaking, you get a super underpowered machine, have a lot of computers. So what do? Right? And you need to distribute. And for a while, we thought of it, well, the job, the moment you run out of things to do on one agent, well, then it's the responsibility of your CI to make that rest fast. Your CI has to distribute. You spawn those jobs. You connect these jobs via things. It basically was always the always like in outside of the big tech companies. It was always the responsibility of your CI. It's your CI system will do it. All right? That's what it is for. All right? And the UCI system is just not equipped well to do it, because the UCI system, like Circle and GitHub Actions and Jenkins and whatnot, right, are general purpose CI systems. So they know nothing about your workspace. But the point of view of your CI system is just a bucket of code you can run random commands against. Right? They can help you, right? So you have to do everything by hand as a result. Because they don't know anything about your project, you have to do everything by hand. You have to say, like, well, now I have to split things. And like you can see some systems will try to make it better by trying to shard test, for example, which didn't really work for any real project for anything serious. But, there is the capabilities in there that they try to approach it by saying, let us pretend we know something about it, right? But in reality, they didn't know. Because, the result was very painful. It's manual. You have to like run multiple jobs, stitch together, upload, download files, do all of this stuff. Didn't work. Sucked, right? Basically. And a lot of complexity, a lot of suboptimal compute. So what we did is basically said, you know what, let's try to change it around and do what, some companies do and say, it's not your CI's job to be fast, right? Your CI's job is to be a convenient way for you to provide a recipe for what to run. When you get up, actually, you need to say, I would like to clone things, run these 5 commands, and then upload the results over there, invoke some integration action to upload some results over there, right? But the responsibility of being fast should lie on your build tool, because your build tool, like NX, knows a lot about your repo, and therefore could it's from the NX point of view, your repo is not a black box. It knows exactly how your projects relate, but which files are created by what target, which files are required to run every target, right? And it can move the things about across a grid of machines in an efficient way, right? So basically, if you just take this responsibility, who is responsible for being fast? Currently, for most tools, it's CI. What we are saying, CI has shouldn't worry about being fast. It's a build tool's job to be fast, right? CI's job is to invoke the build tool, period, right? And once you kind of shift your understanding to this new model, suddenly like, oh yeah, like why, like that's much better. Why would I then configure this 20 different machines talking to each other where the build tool already knows it and can do it for me, right? That was always the model. It took us a few iterations to get it to the right place, because we started with, well, we like running the computer is super hard. It's like, we don't have capacity. Let the user stitch it together, etc. And what the current iteration of it is, which is I think is like the final legit iteration that we envisioned some time ago, is to say that it's just your build tool just does it, and you don't need to worry about it. Like it's really a single line of code. That's kind of the cool part, that you start from having your CI running on one machine, you dropped one line of code, and suddenly it runs on 20 machines, right? And that, to me, is kind of the part. Remember, I talked about the cost of onboarding divided by the value proposition, right? If the cost of onboarding requires to have a very finicky CI setup that you need to maintain, whereas the cost of onboarding is you drop one line, suddenly your CI is 5 times as fast. It's like, okay, so like, why aren't you dropping the line? But to be, because of course we could do that, but we want to be better, because if I'm honest, a lot of people who think they build projects, they don't build big projects. They build medium-sized projects, right? And they build medium-sized projects, and for them, they could kind of win it and say, yeah, I can kind of figure it out anyway, right? But just, building my medium-sized project, I can split it. It's a bit clunky. It's slower than what NX would do with agents. It's less efficient. It would burn my compute. It would be more expensive, right? But it's good enough, and it's like whatever, right? So we added a few extra value points to just show, to flex our, because I remember we have these core capabilities. At the moment you have core capabilities, user-facing features just magically fall out, right? You just like you have a few core capabilities and just things just magically happen. You're like, what is going on, right? So we decided to add end-to-end test splitting and say it literally took us to play like a day or something like that, right? From zero to from whatever ditches to riches, so from zero to hero, right? Just we went from nothing to like it working legit, right? And why is it working? So now with Project Crystal, NX can analyze what your what end-to-end tests you have, and can say, oh, you can run those tests separately. Without dynamic distribution, we can say, okay, we can run them separately, or we can't. So now you don't have to think about which test run which agents. We could just evenly distribute them, right? For example. And then we said, well, but we know them, and because we have your cache information, we actually know which tests are flaky, right? So we can rerun them when they're flaky to basically deflake them for you automatically. You don't have to do anything; it just works. And what's interesting, we run a different machine, so there is no like side effects on the previous round. So we do it legit to make sure that the experience is actually good. And what's interesting in there, that all of the things work together in combination. That's what I'm talking about, core capability. Core capability in here let us derive your targets and analyze what Cypress can run, right? That's what I'm telling you. What integrated style monorepos matter. If you have a learner style monorepo, which every other tool is basically, right? They look at your Cypress project and it's just a thing with 3 npm scripts. One of them called, run Cypress with all the tests. They don't know how to partition it because they don't know you're using Cypress or Playwright, right? From their point of view, you just have a Yarn or PNPM workspace thing, right? And that's kind of we know you're using Cypress. And because of it, we can say, well, you could run all of them together, but you can run all of them separately for distribution. And when we run them separately, because we know your workspace, we can launch, if you run everything separately, but you have to relaunch your dev server every time you run your test, that still sucks, right? Because we do know, we can say, well, if you run them separately, you probably want a static server running your application. Because you have a static server, you need to build it, right? So all of the things now works, right? So now suddenly the distribution works. Like distribution, this model of distribution, why it's better than manual model? Because for end-to-end test splitting to work, you need distribution, right? Because end-to-end test splitting requires you to run a static web server to be even remotely efficient. But to run a static web server, you need to build the artifacts. And to build the artifacts, you need to have a general distribution model such that you build all the things together and then you deliver to the right place, right? All of the things are meant to be like they enable each other, right? So like it's like like the super.
Yeah, like as you said, together. Like how things fall in place, right? Like with Project Crystal being able to dynamically generate targets, which you're now like, hey, we just could generate targets per file, and so now we have those fine-grained targets. And then like the energy agents kind of can just spread it out.
That's right.
And I think like, one important part to note for folks is that kind of maybe followed along with us already. Like we talked a lot about, as you said, like before, the different stages. Like you set it up like via the programmatic API, calculate what projects were affected, and kind of spread it out manually on your CI, right? Somehow. Yeah. But it was always static, right? Maybe tests on this machine, builds on the other, or even some combination because you knew how long those take. But as you monitor changes, you kind of need to fix them continuously. Yeah. And I've seen horrendous scripts and the amount of scripts that just to kind of make that work, right? Then we had the distributed task execution, but you were still running and instantiating. It was way, way easier, but you were instantiating them on your CI agent, right? Like on your CI provider, whatever. So it was also a bit specific to that. And so like we have an image on our docs. And before basically like these agents, now you can see like they are on the NX Cloud infrastructure base. So we manage them, right? That's also why you have that single line. I think that's important for folks to understand, because before these agents, you kind of spin them up together with like the scripts that need to be run. And then NX Cloud was kind of the coordinator of those machines that you gave it. Right. Yeah. And then from there on, like you kind of.
But so let me tell you why the magic is like why the experience is good, right? Is that you take an existing large enterprise repo with like a 2-hour Cypress suite, right? That always causes headache, and you're like, right? And it doesn't really work, right? And you're like, super unhappy, and then you enable the Cypress plugin that we have right now, right? Cypress plugins, you're using Cypress, it's no problem. Let us distribute your builds so the builds are fast. And then you whatever 50 files, we're just going to run them in distributed fashion across different agents, right? On a pool-based view. So like if one of them takes longer, it doesn't, the other agents will pick up the work, etc. If one of them fails one of those tests, we're going to deflake them automatically for you. And remember, deflaking only works with test splitting. If your deflaking works on 20-minute targets, that's pointless, right? Because if it takes 20 minutes, so it has to be something that is short, right? So in all of this stuff, you could do by simply enabling the plugins and doing nothing else, right? I mean, apart from when it starts, it's basically like a few lines of change you can do in 5 minutes, and suddenly, like you get test distribution, test deflaking working just automatically, right? And not in some kind of crazy, it also in a way that it's pretty transparent, where VS Code will actually show you what's going on, right? So we give you enough information you can actually see how it works, right? It's not like some tool you drop inside and like, we thinky, and we give you some. No, you can actually see what's going on. It's just the ease with which you go from not having anything at all to having distributed, deflakeable end-to-end tests, right? That will reuse the static artifacts, etc. Right? It's really like before all of this stuff. It was, it could be. It was an effort. Okay, so before we did this, it was a big effort. A lot of engineers had to actually commit to it. Therefore, no one did it because the cost of onboarding, the effort was high, right? Like some people did it, but a lot of people didn't do it. Now the cost of onboarding is really 5 minutes, or like a few lines of change, push it there, and that's what makes it to me a big deal. That if you have something with a high effort, okay, it has to be like a big team in a bank, and the same. We have 300 developers, they struggle. Okay, let's hire some consultants. They would come in and they will do the effort, and then they see like, okay, it's much better, fantastic, right? But if you have a smaller team of like 20, and you're saying, we don't have time to spend 3 weeks optimizing our alternatives because they're not that bad, right? They're just bad, but they're not that bad. And with something that bad, you'll still deal with the effort because you have
the level of pain had to be much higher before.
Yeah, exactly. But now, even if it's like, I run some end-to-end tests, but occasionally just are flaky. I just want them not to be flaky. Like, enable this solved, right? And the whole deflecting mechanism is generic. There is nothing in there hard-coded for Cypress or Playwright. Any target can be deflated because we know exactly the computation hash. If it changes its status, we can deflate it, right? And that to me is like the value of generality. In this case, that we can deflate anything, we can split anything, and we can distribute anything, right? Therefore, you have a different end-to-end test runner. It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point that we didn't build like a test shardder or anything like that. I feel like that's what some of these other tools are. We just made a way of distributing tasks, and we made that as generic as we needed, and that helped out a lot. I actually remember Edition Addicts maybe remembering a story I had told before, but when we had the conference in Phoenix, this is like something that captured my imagination just because of, I think it was Alton and Rarsh's talk at the time. But I came up with this whole way of like writing a generator to add more tasks to my project JSON to make all this work. And when inferred tasks came in, that fixed all that. So yeah, it was really cool to see how that's all evolved over time. So, we had a question here about NX agents for Pro and Startup Plan. I think Alton actually already answered that. Alton looks good in that picture.
Yeah, it's a very different picture of Alton. He has way more arms. So anyway.
Yeah. Sorry, did I interrupt you there, Victor?
No. Honestly, you should interrupt me. Otherwise, it's just going to be a never.
You run over time. We go to I wanted to jump onto the next.
This is the Victor cult, man. I would want to interrupt our leader.
What was that when you kind of pull up like?
Yeah, I just need to like write NX on my forehead now. It will be all set.
Interesting.
Now I wanted to segue a bit like into the next part because like one part of the NX agents now is not just like that we can distribute it like across a static number of machines, right? But it can be dynamic, right? So that's also a big point. Right now, you just specify 5 Linux medium, but you can specify per PR size. And as we head into Tusky, maybe we can talk about how this could potentially be even more advanced, right? Coming up. So I think that's an important part as well.
Exactly. So I think that's one. I think the ease of setup of agents is already cool. Okay, that's good, right? But what's important to realize is that for any repo of size, all right, a fixed number of agents. Like we're talking about, like even for us, we are not an enterprise team. We have a normal size repo, a medium size repo where we develop them. Our next repo is a medium size repo. Our private repo is a medium size repo, right? But if you look at like an enterprise repo with like 100 developers contributing, that's huge, right? Any repo of that size cannot run well on the same number of agents because your PRs will be different in scope. Right? You have a PR that affects 5% of the repo, another PR that affects 90% of the repo. All right. So that's kind of the issue, that if you have the same number of agents for every PR, what is that number? If you have literally like an order of magnitude difference in compute, like a 10x difference in required compute, right? Do you have 5 agents and then some PRs are super slow, or you have 50 agents and you're wasting compute, which is money? You don't want to be wasting money, and also generating heat and all this, right? So what is your answer? The answer has to be, you need to look at your PR size and allocate the right number of agents for that PR. Right? That's one of the features that NextAgent currently allows you to do in a kind of very basic way, but it's already like super useful. You could say in an NextAgent side currently, I would like my small code changes to use this number of agents, medium size this number of large, and we can detect what the number of agents, like what the code change size is, right? And we let you pick the right number of agents, like this, right? It's a bit manual because but after like a day of tweaking, you can kind of arrive at a number that's pretty good, all right? And then you're saving a ton of compute because most of your changes will be small or medium, probably, not very rarely. In a big enterprise, you actually change the whole repo, all right? So you have basically you're consuming maybe a half of the number of compute that you would have to compute if you just did it like with one number. Right? If you just basically I have GitHub Actions, how many things do I need to run? You're like, so but it goes better than this, because this is still like you allocate, let's say 10 agents, we run it, and we are smart enough to know when your agents will not be needed anymore, such as we can start shutting them down. All right. But we can be even smarter. Right. So for example, currently if you say 10, we just spawn 10 right away. Right. But you may not need 10 at the beginning, because if you look at your CI pipeline, maybe you have some bottleneck at the beginning. But if you imagine your CI pipeline, where you do some building, a bunch of end-to-end tests, some verification, the building part will happen on a few agents. It won't happen on 50 agents, because chances are you have like some slow process that runs on one machine or whatever. Right? But then end-to-end tests you can shard very easily, all right? Because so now you can start with like 3 agents, go to 30, and then go back to 1, right? For example, to do some post work, right? That's one of the things. We could make it such that you can configure it by hand. I mean, of course we could, but that's already quite a lot of configuration. That requires, anything that's a manual configuration. If you make it too sophisticated, at some point it will become inefficient or out of sync. You want to delegate it to the tool. Can you figure it out for me? Right? Because the tool knows, right? That's one of the things where we, decided to employ some of the. We have an AI task force, which a few folks are working in, right? And that's one of the first priorities for the AI task force, is to say, can we do the agent allocation dynamic based on the information we know about it? Because we know a lot about your repo, how many things run, how many things aren't there, et cetera, et cetera. So we could let you just choose, basically, do you care more about money or time? Like, do you want to save compute, essentially money, or do you want to save clock time? All right. Yeah. And you can pick then, and then we can show you roughly where your typical PR would be in terms of time, and we would then allocate the right number of agents at the right time. So you can start, for example, with 3 agents, and then a few minutes in, when we know you would need more, we start allocating more agents preemptively, so they boot up by the time end-to-end tests are required, so they can now start, running all end-to-end tests. So now none of the agents are idle, because that's basically the problem with allocating too many agents, is that you have idle time, right? Which means it's compute you pay for, right? But you don't derive value from. Right? You want to make idle time 0, ideally, or close to 0, right? And that would allow for that. In the Genius, there are a lot of other things of that variety that I think the AI stuff could be very helpful for. That's one example, which is like super easy to understand. People get it, right? The second example, which is people from big banks and healthcare companies would get right away, that most of your repos are built by teams, most of your apps, rather, systems built by many, many teams from different lines of business. All right. We've worked with banks. We like banks. Banks are good, right? And banks like us, right? So in general, we're doing well with that. But you always have like lines of business responsible for different parts of the business, like actually checking accounts that are like credit cards, different, all this type. So you have 10 lines of business in your repo. So a lot of this stuff, and we know what they are right now. If you look at it as a human being, you can sort of guess, right, which part of your code base, in what capacity, like how it belongs to which org it belongs to. The question is, can you figure it out on a spot? I mean, the answer is can, right? We should figure it out from the data you have, right? and actually show you what you have, basically heat maps with different orgs, where you could see which library is owned by which. But as a result, we can show you, for example, the simplest thing, analytics based on your team. Because if you go to any of the existing tools, if you go to, I don't know, Azure, I mean, should go to Azure, but to like Circle CI Analytics or something, and you look at it, what you see is often like, oh, your average CI time is 30 minutes. You're like, that provides zero value to anyone who works at the bank, right? Because you have teams which use, one team can have 1 hour CRN every time because they're like half of the repo is then, and the other team is like a person and a half, and their CI is 5 minutes. And they're like that.
Talk to the design system team where everyone depends on it. Like their builds are always like
exactly. That's
repo.
exactly right. So like that kind of like
infrastructure.
I guess it's kind of useful to see it across teams, but generally speaking, for most teams, it's moot. They actually want to see what my experience is, and they want to see how much is the computer being run my team is responsible for, in case you need to do budget splitting, for example. Right? You should be able to tell, what, you have these 10 teams in your repo, and we actually figured out that about 70% of your compute is burned by this one team, and at the 31st, so like things like that, we can, like, without you having to tell us very much, we can actually figure out based on the structure of your repo, etc. That's like many examples. So we can suggest refactorings, because we actually know when some lib is used by members of different lines of business, and if they split the lib, suddenly they would, have drastic reduction in recompute stuff like that, right? So all those things I kind of know. There's a human being, you always see. Like you spend half a day and you're like, okay, I see roughly where things are. You can tell, right? The question is, can we, ML know it, right? And the answer is yes, it can, of course, right? So that's like a lot of things like that will come from the AI efforts. Is to basically say, can we make it faster by just removing some decision making from you, which you probably won't make a good decision about anyway. And B, can we give you enough affordance that is like a complex repo affordance? I think that's all the value is in there. If you have a complex repo, there is a lot of information that we know, the build to NX knows, right, and Cloud knows, that it can use to give you stuff that is actually relevant to your team and to you, rather than like some average, like this is a failure ratio for your CI runs. Okay, it's not important at all, right? What is important on my team, how often do we break things, right? Kind of stuff. So like things like that, I think would be like just one of the few things that we showed in a video, right? But it's in the works, should be like early things of that variety will start landing in the spring. So
yeah, making that video, I kept over promising. I said AI will just write all of your code from now on, thanks to NX. Victor had to help me dial that back.
And
some AI writes your code. Our AI runs it on CI.
There you go.
No, it's because Jason will be the AI. He will be like, SSH and everything. Like, oh my god, super fast. Our AI is called Jason. He is very tired.
Yes, Jason's awesome. I do have a hard stop here in a few minutes. Did we want to talk about X release real quick, Yuri?
No, I think we can kind of wrap it up. Like, if you share my screen just real quick.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out, like, that is the today's launch, basically. Like, apart from the live stream which we're having right now, we also kind of pushed out NX release. That has been in action to work for a while, right? So we had already an early release in last year in at NXConf, and we kind of kept refining it over time. And I think, like, I really like now the API, how it turned out. So definitely have a look at that. Like, there's a blog post listed here, as well as a talk that James also gave yesterday, which I found was really good because it was very practical and like walking through code base, kind of like a small tutorial of how to use it.
Yeah.
In the blog post, I also linked to the live stream that James did with Kent. So we had a live stream later last year to add NX to Kenty.'s workshop app. And now James jumped on to actually add NX release for it, because like he wanted to release it as small packages.
Yeah.
And I warn you, it's like a 4-hour kind of long live stream, but it has a lot of good gimmicks in it, right? So if you have a chance to kind of watch along as you work or pretend to work or whatever, like it's actually pretty good. It's actually pretty good. Because you can see it on a real world project, how it's being applied, how they kind of debug stuff, and how they go forward. So it's like really good, rather than a Polish like walkthrough tutorial. So definitely check that out. And I think with that, we can wrap it up. As said, like the nx.dev/launch NX page will be there for a while. You find all the recordings there. We keep updating. And we're also planning to have like a wrap-up blog post next week. So we will have like everything in one page where you can click through all the stuff that went out in NX 18.
That's going to be a massive blog post. There's so much stuff.
Yeah, I was about to ask you whether you can.
Oh no. I'll
We'll
get
figure it out.
let me fire up ChatGPT. We'll get this figured out.
Yeah.
Or no, Tusky.
All right,
I'll read
folks.
for Tusky.
Yeah.
Sweet. Thanks everyone for
Cool.
joining.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah. Bye.
Thank you.
Peace.